That would be fine. If anyone has a question or a comment, if it gets too long, we're pretty flexible here, but if you start filibustering, go on after 2 or 3 minutes, we might throw something at you.
While I'm here, I'm Bob Clifford. Achieving claimed that the standards were internationally benchmarked. And it's pretty clear that they never were actually internationally benchmarked. They finally removed that claim from their website. Now, when it was approved by the Council for Academic Standards, it was represented by the people promoting Common Core that it was internationally benchmarked. That is a material representation that was used in the decision that is false. It was a lie. So my contention is that they should be compelled to go start over, readdress the standards with factual information that's correct, because what they did is tainted.
Chamber of Commerce will repeat that. ExxonMobil will repeat that. We have all these major companies, none of whom can read a set of standards. None of them can look to see what they look like elsewhere, all repeating the same information like parrots that they get from CCSSO. And departments of ed are no different. They don't have the same experts there either. So you end up with a lot of people repeating untruthful or inaccurate statements year after year after year, with the idea that if you repeat it long over enough times, people will believe it. And this is what's happened. We have someone with a question.
Okay, that was Bob Clifford, but now I'd like to ask you to give us your name and then go with the question.
My name's Larry Jackson. Excuse me, my name's Larry Jackson, grandparent of 2 children in the Churchill County School District. And since I wasn't there last night, I saw a little bit of a newspaper article on it. I don't know, but I do understand that when someone makes a charge of assault, that is not something that is good. I also understand that having lived a little while in this United States and having done some traveling, we do need international standards here because our grades and our children are being left terribly inadequately educated. But we've done that across this country for a long time. Okay? We have had underperforming school districts and we've had high-performing school districts. And I believe the goal of Common Core was to at least level the playing field. Now, I'm upset because you're telling people to withdraw from Common Core, not improve it, but to withdraw. And that I find very offensive. Telling people to not allow their children to take the test, I find that offensive. Now, please understand, I'm not quite through. I also believe that one of the things that Common Core is doing in this has raised a lot of the levels in the education in this particular community. I also believe that because this community has a large amount of transient people, military and support staff, that the people who get educated here have to go other communities and then try to keep up with that system. So we need a high level of education. As I understand Common Core, it is a minimum level. There is nothing there preventing this school board or any other school board in this state or any other state from raising those standards to a higher level. But I do see one big improvement with Common Core in the fact that the kids have to write their answers. If you look at the tests that they get in the school, many of them are computer given, but they're not multiple choice or true false. They have to describe their answer. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, that was something very hard for me to do. So that part of Common Core, I'm very much in favor of. I'm also very much in favor of it, and I don't mean to be insulting with this, but you seem to be on another career okay? Because somebody's paying you to come around the country and do these things, and that's okay.
They're not.
They're not paying you?
No.
All right, well, then I apologize, okay?
Never have been
There's
made.
a bucket out there for
Okay,
condemnation.
thank you for your questions. Did they respond to those?
I'll respond quickly to several
Your
of them.
comments?
First of all, no, I have been talking for 3 years around the country, and no one has paid me to do this at any time. The only expense that is paid for are my travel expenses, and they're paid for by local groups who invite me, and they often pass a hat. It's never the same group, and there's no Daddy Warbucks behind me. So that I've been doing because I just need to let people know what is going on from my perspective. But there isn't anybody compared to, say, what is happening to Common Core, which has Gates Foundation money behind it, as you probably know, and just about every organization in the country has been given money to promote Common Core. So I am fighting $64 billion, and it's not easy. But let me go to your substantive comments. It levels the field, but levels it down. That's my concern. If we were leveling the field upward, I am not, in theory, opposed to national standards in math and science. I've said that from the beginning for 6 years. I would be very happy if we had first-class math and science standards, and I could see English standards for about half of a school year. There would have to be tailored standards for each state or for different kinds of issues, but you could have half-time English standards as well on a national level. But we have inferior standards that are confusing everybody and are really deteriorating the rest of the curriculum. I haven't even mentioned history study, which is not Common Core, but it is affecting the teaching of history because of the literacy standards. I've got something in one of my handouts. So leveling the field, it does downward, and that I find unacceptable, because what we need to do, and I agreed with one of your other statements, we have had a 50-year decline in educational standards in this country. We needed to go up, not further down, and what we're doing is going further down. There may be anecdotes from teachers who like the standards. We hear that everywhere. But teacher associations, unions, groups of teachers are coming out against Common Core. This is a growing protest movement from coast to coast. We're not causing it with the unions, but you do have to read some of the mainstream newspapers talking about mainline unions and their concerns with Common Core, the testing part of it. That we're not making up either. Now, the leveling the field, we've talked about. The movement of children around is a separate issue. We've had very good Department of Defense schools in this country, because I know the curriculum that's been in them. Those curricula have been aligned downward to Common Core. So yes, those kids will get the same kind of curricula that are in other states that use Common Core, but it's not as good as what they had. This is happening in Catholic schools, which is why many Catholic parents are now upset with the decision in many Catholic parishes to use Common Core. There's a group of dissident Catholic parents who are now trying to go bishop by bishop to get Common Core outlawed on their own in their communities. We can't even go into all of these details, but they exist, and someone who's on top of them, Homeschooling Association, find out what they're doing to try to protect homeschooling parents, not during the years when, in most states, they legally can teach whatever they want. By the time they get to the end of high school, the question is, what kind of college admission test can they take that is not going to require them to have had a Common Core curriculum? They're very worried, and they have lawyers looking into this issue. So there are many serious legal issues that are detailed so that we can't even talk about them in brief snatches. But the organizations themselves can tell you far more and have writings that would be accessible for you to understand what the issues are. We know that the SATs have been aligned down to Common Core. That was David Coleman's first task when he became president of the College Board last year. All of this is public information. ACT has said it has already aligned its ACT admission, college admission test, down to Common Core. We have the GED has also been aligned to Common Core. what is happening is that there are no independent points of reference so that one can then find out how dumbed down you've become, because all of the existing metrics are aligned to the same set of standards. This has been a very interesting phenomenon for test experts who know what's going on to look at. How do you get information on what's happening to your own school system? TIMSS, the only international test that is not under our control, is the only test so far that is independent of Common Core. And guess what the USED wants to do? Not take it anymore. Massachusetts entered as a separate country to take it several times, so it could get independent information on how its kids did in math and science. But the USED wants to take TIMSS, not TIMSS, PISA, P-I-S-A, Programs for International Student Assessment, which is the only other international test which tests skills in 15-year-olds. So it is aligned with Common Core's skills. There are too many other issues that I'm sorry we don't have a chance to get to discuss in detail, but one would have to put all of these together to understand that there's a much larger picture and a much grander plan behind it that you need to understand.
I'm going to ask you not to,
I just
not
want
a
to say, I
follow-up.
apologize for the one comment.
Okay.
Okay, because I did believe that that was what was going on. And I apologize for having a misconception.
I was just going to say that if you wanted to follow up, Tony and Becky have been waiting, so I would have them go.
That's why I was just standing here.
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to walk away when you rebut.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple comments. You see, the world is what we call a zero-sum game. If somebody does well, somebody else does worse. So you better look and see what's going on out there. Now, he made what I think is a very important observation, that there's been improvement in the outcomes of the kids locally when they use the Common Core. Well, what does this mean? What does this mean? You start with standards that are miserable, and you move to standards that are slightly better. You expect to see some improvement, but is it relevant? Does it change things for the kids? Does it improve the opportunities that they're going to have as adults? Well, let me tell you a little bit about what the world is like at Stanford. Okay, at Stanford for the last 10 years, calculus has been remedial. The single course with the largest enrollment at Stanford is the first quarter of the advanced calculus sequence. And by the end of their first year, well over 2/3 of the freshmen have taken advanced calculus. Okay, so that's the level at the elite schools. At the elite schools, it's way more than just 2 years behind that you're talking about. I mean, Common Core is 2 to 3 years behind international expectations at best. But at the elite schools, it's way more than that. Moreover, every few years while I was there, I would be an advisor to a group of entering freshmen interested in STEM areas. When I started in the late 1960s at Stanford, they were virtually every one of them was a U.S. citizen. The last time I did this, I guess 4 years ago, I had eight students that I was advising. 7 of them were foreign-born. 7 of them were foreign-born. Now, Stanford has certain standards and expectations of its students. If we cannot fill our class with U.S. citizens at the level we expect, we will fill it with foreign students. If you look at the graduate students in all the technical areas at Stanford, except mathematics, there are over 2/3 of them are from East Asian countries. Stanford is kind of more or less even throughout. There are a bunch of people from Arabic countries, from Israel, from Russia, from the East Asian countries, and so on. But very, very few of our students today at any real level are Americans. And that's the reality. A small improvement in outcomes that may be given to you by Common Core isn't enough to even begin to make up the difference. So what I'm talking about when I talk about the inadequacies of Common Core are not against standard American standards, but against what is actually going on out there in the rest of the world.
Good evening. My name is Tim Pisano. First off, I'd like to say thank you very much for upholding your commitment to come to this event this evening. And not like your compatriots in the Nevada state government who failed to show up. When I came here this evening, I was prepared to speak directly to the proponents of Common Core. So I'm going to direct my comments to the empty seats that are beside you, because it's more pertaining to them, because I understand your position. First off, I'm 54 years old. I'm a Navy veteran. I graduated in 1978. I got a good education in a public school in Pennsylvania. When I went into the Navy, I got involved in aircraft. It was the love of my life. And I worked on aircraft on and off for a period of 21 years. On tactical aircraft for the United States government. After that period of time, I got involved in a process that I was even more interested in, that was rocketry. I got involved in that because it's what I wanted to do. I wasn't pigeonholed by Common Core when I was a child. Instead, I was promoted to go and do what I was interested in doing. And I also was encouraged to go and gain the education that I needed to do exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And I believe that Common Core, the way it sits right now, would be exactly the antithesis to what I would have been able to do as a young man. So, in doing this process, or learning this process, I believe that I am more autodidactic in the learning process with regards to politics, Common Core, the Constitution, government in general, and that's why I got involved with a lot of these topics in the first place, because of my concern for my community, my kids, my grandkids, but also that some things were wrong, and Common Core has been one of those things that have been wrong. It's just been eating at me in my stomach ever since I've heard it in 2010. So, being somebody that is autodidactic, I tried to direct my questions to these two unknown people that aren't here along those lines. So first off, my first question was, how does the Common Core curriculum benefit an individual that may choose to enter the military or decide to maintain a reliance on an autodidactic education? Similarly, how does Common Core help an individual that chooses to defer an entry into an institution of higher learning, such as college, or into a trade program? And how does it benefit an individual that chooses to educate their children in a homeschool environment? These are questions that are very important, because not everybody is destined for college. And not everybody at the age of 18 is especially destined for college. They may need to get out in the world and live a little bit and learn what they want to do with the rest of their lives. Because I think we all have heard that there are people that have gone out and got a college education and they're not doing what they were trained to do.
Tim, can we wrap it up about 30 seconds?
No.
Try real hard.
A minute. Now, Nancy Smith of the Data Quality Campaign recently produced a report entitled The Next Generation State Data System: What is Needed to Support the Next Generation Assessment and Accountability Systems. Among the 10 essential elements of a comprehensive data system was the need for a unique statewide student identifier to help track student data by teachers, counselors, principals, and other school and district administrators. Interesting and alarmingly is the absence of the parents, of the student, and the student themselves, either minor or adult, from the list. I think they have a right to know what the results of the testing is. Does Common Core predispose that the very people that are vested with the education that they are receiving not entitled to or qualified to evaluate the individual specific performance data? On the issue of such data, who is it or will administer, be the custodian of, or propagate such data mentioned previously? Please tell me that it isn't a private company named Pearson who recently was forced to repay $9.5 million to the state of Wyoming for the complete default of their contract after their computerized testing program failed upon rollout.
Wrap it up, please.
And furthermore, how is it going to be paid for? Will it be the federal government paying for it? Will the teachers' unions pay for it? Or will we Nevada citizens have to pay for this program? Several questions that I've asked other proponents for Common Core. In all my research to date on the subject, why is it proposed curriculum devoid of a process for the public to challenge inaccuracies in the curriculum content or of included content in general? And why is a practice devoid of a process that affords an individual to either challenge or dispute the findings, results, or conclusions of such standardized testing?
Okay, let's let them,
Try to approach that.
Would be able to comment, I'm not sure if there's a question.
Well, I think you already did in some respects in regards to as Common Core prepared people for, Tim talked about autodidactic kinds of education, college education, and so forth, and I think you addressed that a little bit, that it's not preparing.
It's got different plans that it is developing so far as we understand its data collection system, but we really don't have a clear picture of what the goals are of this yet. This has been part of the problem because we find out a little bit more each year what is being planned, and the data collection is still pretty much a mystery as far as where it's going and what the purposes will be for it. So unless you have something to add.
I really don't. What I would say is this: I am glad that I am not sitting in one of the empty chairs and having to deal with that particular sequence of questions.
Good evening. My name is Carol Feinberg and I came from Reno. I just have one really quick question, and that has to do with what Larry Jackson addressed, and I think that it's real important. You so excellently explained all those other items that he was asking about, but you didn't address the testing, and I think that's extremely important and the reason why you're against it.
The testing is just being rolled out now, and frankly, there is very little those of us outside the testing consortium can say about the tests. We do not know yet where the cut score or pass score is going to be, who exactly is going to be setting the cut score or pass score. This is critical. We have not been able to review items that are literally on the test. Perhaps Department of Ed people have had an opportunity, we don't know. They would be the closest to having information on the test. But the review items in ELA, I will say that I have looked at sample items that have come from both of the two main consortia, PARCC and SBAC, and I am not at all impressed by the quality of the test items.
I was mostly asking about the data collection.
Oh, data collection, not the test.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I
That's
thought
okay.
you said test.
Well, that's what comes out of the testing, is because they first sign in
Well,
and they have
the computer-based testing will make sure that there are pieces of information. As soon as a child goes to a computer to take a test, they've got to put in their name, their teacher, their grade, and their age or some other information. And all of that is going to be fed ultimately to the USED. But as I say, we don't know what this information is to be finally used for. It's within, so far as we can tell, Department of Labor Workforce. So So that's planning. It's not within an academic kind of channel that the information is being collected for. But the tests themselves are computer-based, and as long as they're computer-based, there are contracts that a lawyer named Jane Robbins, who has worked for the American Principles Project, has looked at. She's tried to find the contracts. And what seems to be the nature of both of the major test consortia is that while their information may stay with them or with the State Department of Education, the fact that the USED has funded these test consortia means that the USED can call for that information to be sent on to them, so that the test consortia are acting as middlemen. That's all we know at this point. So it's not direct, and each one can claim, no, the data do not come directly from the student to the USED, but it's hidden.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, it's not clear.
Hey, I'm Becky Dodd, and I have several questions. The first one is, who should write the standards, and how do we make sure we have good ones if all of them we've had so far are inferior? Secondly, you have not addressed the reasonableness of standards at the primary grade, so I'm curious what your feelings are about those, or if you're only concerned with the upper levels. And you, Dr. Totsky, I believe that was your name, correct? Stotsky, mentioned that there were some serious gaps in ELA. We did hear at least one that we believe is missing in math. I wondered what some of those examples might be in ELA.
A couple of them were on this one-page handout, which you may or may not have gotten. I'll answer that first. There are no standards on, for example, the history of the English language, which is an important standard that is in the best sets of ELA standards. There are no standards for, say, British literature. Before Shakespeare, after Shakespeare, there is a requirement of one Shakespeare play, but it's as if Shakespeare exists in a total vacuum. Nothing before, nothing after. The reason why these content standards are important is because that is what gives substance to a curriculum and to the kinds of readings that you would want students to be able to do by high school level. But your question about the concern of at the elementary level is an important one. Common Core has one strong strand, which I have always told people about when they've asked me. It's the reading fundamentals strand. It is about what we know is based on sound beginning reading research. It's surrounded by more or less whole language balanced literacy kinds of standards. But even that one strand is isolated, and the people who wrote it, I happen to know most of the people who've written most of the different strands in ELA, unlike math, they were farmed out to different groups of people. The vocabulary, the literature, all of these were farmed out to different groups of people. So it was putting them together that was the major task, and they had no overall editor, which I was able to question about at a March meeting where Sue Pimentel indicated that there were about 70 editors for the ELA standards, which means, in other words, no overall editor. As people handed in these bits and pieces, she was just physically putting them together. And the reading strand, which is very good, written by Louisa Moats and Marilyn Adams, who are well-known reading researchers, have already given their criticism of what is happening to that reading strand in Common Core.
Which will affect the primary element.
Which is the basic
Primary level.
development of reading in the elementary grades. They are not happy. And you would have to read Louisa Moats' own comments, which you can Google and get them for yourself. M-O-A-T-S. She is a well-known reading researcher, and she was asked to write that strand by David Coleman and the other people in the project. So you have different problems at different levels. I think I've answered.
There was the other question Becky asked, well, who should be writing the standards?
Who should be writing? That is in my procedures that I've laid out. We did this in Massachusetts, and it worked well. First of all, you get together people from higher ed, literary scholars, we're talking about ELA now, and good English teachers. The best English teachers you can find will understand K-12. And we had a group of them to get together and flesh out the beginnings of K-12. Then you go to different grade levels of teachers. Teachers are very important in this process, but they are important not so much for the content of the literature standards, which you want to have honed and sharpened by people who have taught at that level, English teachers or literary scholars who have some sense of what would be suitable for college readiness. But you want to have teachers give you a sense of what is developmentally appropriate at different grade levels as you go through the elementary grades. This is certainly true in math, where I did the same thing, even though math is not my subject. Call in different grade levels of teachers and ask them to go through what groups of content experts have worked out for whether they are appropriate for that grade level, whether they should be up, down, rewritten differently, not incorrectly, but at least in a way that would be more friendly to teachers who would use them. That was what we accomplished in Massachusetts, and we knew that we had hit that well because when we sent out a survey, department did this in '07 or '08, years after these content standards had been in place, we asked them for revision purposes, what were the strengths, weaknesses, etc. 30 people in the entire state bothered to reply, and none of them were English teachers. This told us that we had developed standards that were well accepted by English teachers. They did not have any concerns about needing different standards for what they were doing. Indeed, the rise of student scores on NAEP tests and even on international tests in math and science told us that we had standards that were teachable, that were understandable, and that were making a dent in classrooms, as well as serving as the good basis for our tests, which were also considered among the best state tests in the country. We still don't know the quality of the tests, but I think that covers the question of who.
Yeah, I was wondering if Dr. Milgram would like to respond to Becky's questions about the standard in the primary and elementary, and also who should be writing the standard.
Yes, sure. Yeah, well, as Sandra said, the correct thing is there were 3 solid strands in the drafts from January through May of Common Core's math standards. That was fractions, place value, and ratios and rates. Those 3 topics were well done and teachable and coherent, and I had no issues with them. That's the most important thing. And if you compare what was in those drafts to what is in the final version, by far the largest differences occur in fractions, place value, and ratios. And errors were introduced, flat-out errors, and stupid methods for doing things were introduced that are part of the issue with these kids bursting out into tears. And that's the kind of thing that you see happens when you have a document that was written. There were some real professionals involved in the writing of this thing, but at a certain point they were ignored, and what was happening was that the people in charge had decided it was more important to get political buy-in on the document than to have it first rate. So what they were doing, and this is where the changes came in, what they were doing was taking input and criticisms from state departments of education and from various interested math groups. And that's where the errors started entering in, because state departments of education are often composed of very well-meaning and serious people, but typically their knowledge of mathematics is sketchy, to say the best. So what was the other that we were supposed to deal with?
Who should write the standard?
So who should write the standards? Well, the thing that Sandra sort of rapidly said was there should be members of the higher education community involved in the writing. They shouldn't be the only people. Certainly teachers should be well represented, particularly teachers of mathematics at the elementary grade levels, middle school levels, and high school levels. But there must be people, and they should be top-level people, the best you have in the state, people coming from the high end of the academic groups in mathematics and maybe in statistics. If you produce a committee that is based, is shaped like that, then almost for sure you're going to get really good math standards. And in the interim, you can use the pretty successful standards from Massachusetts, Indiana, California that were out there before Common Core. So that's kind of what I think is most important here, is that the mix include mathematicians, real mathematicians, as well as these other groups.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and you guys look very tall. I teach 3rd and 4th and 5th grade math. And I have a question about, you mentioned the standard in ELA about identifying the main idea, and you said that it's different if you're talking about the 3 Little Pigs versus Moby Dick. But basically it'd be the same thing, because wouldn't you agree that's still just a DOK level 1, right? They're just identifying the main idea.
The skill is the same.
The skill is the same.
Right, that's the point. The
Okay.
skill is the same, but the level of the content is different.
Okay.
A trill in a Clementi sonatina is different from a trill in a Beethoven sonata. It's a difference in
I
the
looked
level
up
of
the
the
Common
content.
Core standard RI 4.2, and it doesn't just say determine the main idea. It says that they're supposed to go into the deep and wide, a breadth of material and informational, poetry, drama, I mean everything. So I just want to see, how would you write that standard differently, I guess? What would be a good way to write that standard? Or an exemplar? Or first class?
I wouldn't be writing skills standards. It would be content that I would be concerned about. And you'd have to look at either the California ELA standards, Indiana is similar, the old Massachusetts. Let me give you an example
Yeah, that's
that
what
I
I'm
often, but not at the grade 3 level, because I don't have them right in my head.
Right, sure.
It would deal with genres. It might be in grade 4 or 5, we had something about read tall tales, legends, myths from American literature. I mean, we were dealing with content, the genres that they would have to read. The skills are part of the discussion of the work, but they're not the focus of the lesson. The lesson is understand the conventions of the genre, understand what a tall tale is,
So are those
become
not in the
familiar
Common Core
with the
anymore?
best tall tales that are out there.
Are those absent from Common Core?
Is what?
Is that absent from Common Core?
Yes, the
genres?
The division into the 4 major genres and what are the differences as you go up the scale. For example, by grades 9 and 10, this is something our English teachers wanted. We have a standard that says students are to become familiar with the themes, structures, and plots of classical Greek or Roman epic poetry. It sounds very esoteric, but what we are referring to is the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the Aeneid, which is what most teachers, years ago, English teachers used to teach in grade 9 and 10. There is nothing like it in Common Core. We're getting at content. This is what we're getting at. Literary, historical knowledge.
Okay.
That's what we're building. It's a knowledge-oriented set of standards as opposed to a skill set of standards.
Do you think there's any place for skills in the standards?
Yes, the skills will be taught and emerge from the content, but you won't get the content emerging from the skills. That's the difference.
Okay, that's interesting. And then one quick question for the gentleman. How do you feel about Singapore math?
Which version?
The version I'm using.
That's helpful.
The original version.
The publication date?
You got me.
The trouble is that in a certain sense, all of the versions coming from Singapore, of Singapore math, are pretty darn good. But the best by far was the version that was copyrighted in the early 1990s. And,
Primary math was the name of that
primary math,
one.
right.
Yeah.
And that is really significantly better than the others if you look at it from the perspective of the actual mathematics that's going on.
Thank you.
For my question now, if I may, one of the stated goals, the main stated goal, I believe, of Common Core is to prepare children for the 21st century. I asked you this in Reno this afternoon, but I'd like for the people here to hear it also. Dr. Terrence Moore of Hillsdale College, a history professor there, has said if you want to prepare your children for the 21st century, give them an 18th century education. What would be your comment to that?
I would agree with the spirit of what he is saying, because I know that I have heard Terrence and I've read his works, and I know that what he's talking about is that 18th, 19th century novels, other works in literature, used vocabularies and sentence structure that we would like students to still be able to handle when they're in high school. That's high school level reading. Right now, our kids can't read 18th century works. They can't even read the Declaration of Independence or our primary documents because they were written in the 18th, early 19th century. So we have a serious problem. Whereas if you make sure that students understand the literary historical genre aspects of the history of their own language, they will be able to read current or modern contemporary works with very little difficulty. That is not what the school needs to do. So I understand what Terrence is saying. We want a classical education, which is the kind of charter school I visited in Colorado that he helped to sponsor. It was excellent. I visited one, I'll just say this briefly because it was really a mind-blowing experience for me. I visited a 10th grade class that was reading Moby Dick. And they were in the middle of discussing it, so it wasn't a show for me. They were in the middle of it. And then I visited a British literature seminar, and they were reading Paradise Lost. They were in the middle of it. These are kids who are getting the kind of education that I think all of our kids deserve. If they get, they may not be able to read those specific works, but there are comparable quality works by authors that they could read, depending upon reading level and parent support. But that is what he's after.
Would you like to respond, Dr. Milgram?
Sure. Let me add a little bit about the math. So 21st century math, what the heck is that? Math is math. The math that was learned and used in 2000 BC is math that is every bit as valid today and correct today as it was then. Math that was used in 200 BC is the same, and there they were getting calculus was starting to appear. 1,000 years ago, the same. 1,000 years from now, the same. Math is math. So to say that there's certain math that is 21st century, as a mathematician, that makes no sense whatsoever. But what they actually want to say that means is, what they want to say is, oh, you no longer have to learn the math. You have to learn how to talk about math. And so this becomes 21st century math according to Common Core. Well, that's fine. I already indicated to you what the real situation in the world is vis-a-vis US students and citizens. So let me talk a little bit about 21st century math in China. So I was handed by the Chinese at the time they implemented this and started it, their national curriculum for middle high school, that is 9th and 10th grade, 8th, 9th, and 10th. There were 5 courses that were listed, and they were very detailed descriptions of what was to occur in them. And the 3rd course was a course that was entitled Algorithms. And what was this course doing? Well, this course was explaining the foundations for computer science in terms that 9th, 10th graders could understand, and preparing them to program computers at any level whatsoever, to create the algorithms that you use in programming. Programs and algorithms are the same notion. And to show them what this process really is, to give them enormous amounts of practice in actually doing it, and and there we are. There is nothing like that in our curriculum. Well, that's 21st century math. That's the stuff that you need to do to run robotics systems. It's the stuff you need to do advanced electronics with, and so on and so forth. That's 21st century math. We are not even getting close to that in what Common Core is recommending and telling you is 21st century math. What they're doing is preparing their kids to actually participate in the world as it is, and what we are doing is, I have no idea.
The reason that I am suggesting that is that if you want to begin the process of getting Common Core's standards out of your state, and this is true all over the country, if you can reduce participation in a Common Core-based test to less than 95%, you reduce the validity and reliability of the test results so that they can't count for anything. This was true of No Child Left Behind. They wanted to have at least 95% or more participation so the results would be valid and reliable. And the reason for doing this is to get out Common Core, because I do not think it is designed to upgrade public education, which we agree needs to be upgraded. As far as I'm concerned, it will downgrade American education even more than it has been in the past 50 years. I think that direction we could all agree on. The question is, does Common Core move it up or move it down even further? And we both see too many problems in going upward. We tend to think that it's going to go even further downward, and that's why we have the critiques that we have. I think our high schools have to make coursework available based on more challenging standards. What you require for graduation is one thing. What you require for college readiness is a different thing. And this was something that we discussed very early on. Two very different concepts have been merged and fudged. To be high school diploma ready is one thing. We've done that in this country for a long time, hundreds of years. We have accepted a wide range of student academic achievement for a high school diploma. But the colleges expect more and different. And remember, we used to say if you wanted to be ready for college, you took a college prep course. There are other ways to handle it. I'm not talking about any particular way of developing it. But to make high school students college ready skips over the high school diploma competency issue. Most state standards, including your old ones, were to make your students high school diploma ready. Common Core has skipped it and is now trying to get students from grade 11 into college. There's something missing in the middle. And the question that was raised, do all kids have to go to college? No. Do all of them want to go to college? No. They all don't want to go to the military. They don't all want to go to work. So the question is, how do you get effective citizens in a form of government that depends on self-government, a certain level of reading and writing? There are much larger issues involved, which we don't get into because they are more philosophical in nature. But that is ultimately where my concerns come from, because I have grown up and lived in an open meeting form of government, which requires citizens who can understand and read the articles on the warrant. That was the nature of town meeting in New England. You had to be able to read the articles on the warrant so you could participate as a knowledgeable citizen. And part of the justification for an English program, K-12, was to prepare students to read and write well enough to be able to do that. I accept it. I mean, I have no quarrel with that goal. But I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion at this hour of night. I don't know.
It certainly is getting late.
It's getting late for it. You already have, I don't know if Nevada has,
Yes.
you have adopted the next generation science standards,
Yes.
which are correlated with Common Core's math standards. They were produced separately. They're not strictly Common Core standards, but they are related to them. and they have been reviewed by scientists who are very concerned because they miss high school chemistry set of standards, and high school physics can't be taught because the math isn't there. So we have serious issues with what is happening to the American high school. That is part of my whole outlook on what is going on. History is not a set of separate standards, but there are a set of essential questions or guiding questions that have come out of NCSS, National Council for the Social Studies, and I believe achieved. There are two groups that have co-authored these guiding questions, and at this point what they're telling schools to do or states to do is to simply layer them onto your existing history and social studies standards. It's not clear where they're going. There will be music standards, art standards, and others. They're all in the works, and I have heard from people in the arts who are as distressed as I am because they do not see the right people on, for example, the Music Standards Committee. I happen to be very involved as an amateur in music, so I know some of the people who are fine music educators in the state of Massachusetts. There are plans to have every single one of the courses taught related to standards for the purpose of assessing teachers, the teachers of those subjects, because you can't assess a music teacher on English or math standards. So therefore, in their reasoning, you have to develop standards that will then be used for rating the art teacher, the dance teacher, the music teacher, the drama coach, and they will be then also used to accredit schools of education for the training programs. It's huge. It's enormous.
I'd like to say that I appreciate the opportunity to have dialogue. This is wonderful to be able to ask questions. And I would like to say that what the gentleman said about foreign students in colleges, that my son went to Georgia Tech, got his doctor's degree in aeronautical engineering, and I went to eat lunch with him at the cafeteria, and I was shocked at the large number of foreign students that were there versus the American students. And it was scary at the time. I thought, this is scary. So what he says is very true. And I guess not enough American students because they're not prepared and they don't want to go into it. Is that the reason?
Many of them want to go into it, but they get scared off because when they get into the hopefully they don't end up at a community college, but they get into a four-year school, and then they see how far they have to go, how much work they have to do to even reach calculus. They tend to give up on their original plans and choose other majors.
I have four things, and I just, if you can give me a quick answer, because I know the hour is late. The first question is, what is the difference in local control that we had prior to Common Core? How does Common Core affect local control? You know, what we had, maybe what we have now and what we might have in the future. How is Common Core going to affect that? If you can answer that briefly.
When standards at the state level were introduced, and No Child Left Behind made it clear that every state had to have them. I don't know if this state had them before, because all states didn't have them. But under Common Core, teachers must address the standards in English and math that are in the Common Core standards if their state board has adopted it and their local board has also chosen to adopt it. Now, as I said earlier, it is the case in most states that state-adopted standards are voluntary. They were even in Massachusetts. We knew that. It is the state test that must be administered. So local school boards, if they wanted to, could say, no, we're not going to adopt Common Core, we're going to use another set of standards. There's one town in New Hampshire that has done exactly that. I've spent time visiting them. Why most places go along with whatever the state board has adopted is because the state test will then be used for the student scores and how they will be used. That is the reason why local school boards go along. So that is the control that Common Core now exerts at the local level. Yes, your curriculum can be somewhat flexible, but it will be less and less flexible depending upon how the scores come out. We don't know in the future where all of this is going, but there are voices, as we've been told, at the national level that talk about the need for nationalizing curriculum. So that means there will be even less flexibility than there is now at the local level. And what happens with administrators training, teachers training, they will be in schools of education that will be accredited by whatever criteria come from the federal government because of the way grants are structured, Pell Grants, money that goes, how the money flows to the universities for their higher ed research and to education schools for their programs. A lot will depend upon what is happening right now. There was an article today, apparently, in the Wall Street Journal, in which Duncan is talking about the need for centralizing educational policy in the USED in the name of fairness. No local control, and ultimately no state control. There have been efforts made to get rid of local school boards by having regional educational authorities. You have to begin to put all of this together, the tendency to centralize where power is located. And the more that you have fewer local boards, some states getting together for regional educational boards, maybe appointed by USED, hasn't been worked out, so we don't know. But all of that will mean less parent input and control of whatever happens at the local level.
What you said is true, because I've heard that too from someone who works in the legislature, that has been brought up that we do away with local boards, so that is a true thing. Okay, and that fits in with the question about monies regulating what local boards do. How does money play into this from the federal government?
He who, has the money calls the tune.
He who plays gets the money.
Okay, and then another question I have is, so if there's committees in Washington that are forming the curriculum, and we don't know who's on the committee, I mean, some people may know, but I know I've tried to find out who was on the committee and I had a hard time. What people are, in the future, what do you see as agendas, hidden agendas coming into Common Core curriculum, and is that a possibility?
We don't even know if they're hidden agendas. I mean, they may be open agendas. I don't want to sound conspiratorial, because I don't know that these people are conspiratorial.
Well, and I'm not saying now, I'm saying down the future.
They're saying they want centralized educational policy making. I don't think that's conspiratorial. That's pretty straightforward. Yeah, it would be like a France. The problem is, what would be the nature of the goals they see for the end of K-12? What allowances would they make for different kinds of student interests? Or do they see any variation that should be used to account for student difference? I mean, most countries in the world do have ministries of education, and they do centralize what they're trying to do in their countries. We've had a very different structure in this country, which may be related to some of the energies and strengths of this country, but it does leave gaps, and these gaps have been the excuse or the rationale for centralizing more and more control. But it's so removed from local interests and parents' interests that it's not clear how it would ever work successfully with the kind of parents we have today in this country.
Okay, I think that addressed all my questions.
Okay, could we go with the last?
Where is she?
Larry Jackson again. I brought my 5th grade grandson's assignment book, and I would like to maybe relieve some of your fears as to his education. This is his schoolwork assignment that he will do the next day. We will describe words with root meanings. We will plan our writing based on 2 passages. We will prepare to work with reading buddies. We will plan our writing. We will compose and evaluate our writing. We will respond to a journal prompt. We will determine the greatest common factors of a set of numbers. We will determine the greatest common factors and do that in the simplest forms. We will talk about the Declaration of Independence and how it affects us. We will explain how the Declaration of Independence affects us. That is his 5th grade assignments during 1 week.
Do you have one more?
Just really briefly on that. I have a 6th grade son. My name is Lanny Fable. And I'm very concerned about the math. An example of one of his assignments was they had to do a division problem.
Could you get a little closer to the
A
microphone?
division problem to decide how many hours a day a gentleman had worked. And at the end, when we came to the conclusion, it was 36 hours a day. That was the answer to the problem. And I had a problem with that. And I wonder where this comes from. And there are no books. And when a parent is not versed in math and they need to help their child, there is no math book to turn to. There is no explanation as to what the assignment is or how to help your child understand it. Fortunately, I'm very good at math, but the 36 hours a day was hard to swallow. And hard to tell my child that that was not just a joke, I don't know. And that's the kind of thing I'm seeing. I'm deeply concerned about the math program. And the fact that there's no book. And we've been at this for a half a year now. And he has studied probably 3 things in math. It's crazy.
Do you know the name of your math? Do you know the name of your math textbook program? Is there a program? It doesn't have a name?
Well, when I called the counselor to talk to her about this, it sounds like, and I'm not real sure, there's no math book.
But it could have a name.
No
math, no book?
No, some of the stuff is created by the teachers, and it's, I don't know where they get it.
Off the web.
Right, and they decide, if, like, I wanted to prearrange an absence for my student and get their work ahead of time. They don't have it together until the morning of, it seems like, and you can't get the work in advance, and I can't, it's very frustrating for me.
Well, maybe afterwards you can come up and show me the problem and we can go through it.
Oh, no, it was 36 hours a day. It was not a complicated problem.
Well, I mean, there are more issues than just that.
And then they
The
want you
question
to-
would be, what did they actually have in mind? And I would like to see an example of a problem like this that gives a correct answer of 36 hours a day, and see what it was that they were thinking when it was produced.
And then in the math, I agree with you, math is math, there's answers, they're black and white, and they are always asking my child to discuss it, and how many different ways could you, I don't know, it just isn't this black and white concrete thing that math is. It's a feeling.
We're gonna wrap this up. Maybe a good way to wrap it up. And then if you have another question or something, you might want to come up and ask individually.